This video will be including footage and dungeons from the new Endwalker expansion as a heads up for anyone still avoiding Endwalker content. So I capped absolutely every job to level 90 about a week ago, and people want the leveling guide, and so this is going to be a very different video from what probably people are expecting. If you were expecting a rehash of how amazing and incredible Bozja is and want to combust both me and the cat daddies there, you're wrong, because in a similar light to my 1 to 80 Shadowbringers guide that I have on my channel here, I'm putting my personal biases completely to the side and giving you a ton of different options for you to choose from. Backed by popular demand, if you enjoy this video or if it helps you at all, I'd super incredibly appreciate if you dropped a full stack of Omni level 90s on that like button and cat daddy that subscribe button. For level 1 to 80, I'm going to keep it short in this video and I'm going to defer completely to my already existing leveling guide from Shadowbringers. It is still solid and checking with others remains ironclad in to Endwalker. With the level cap raised to 90 though, now things get a bit spicier and we do need to talk about the options. So easing us into the guide, I want to introduce some categories for approaching leveling that I found help people understand better. So there are going to be 2 major categories that I'm going to consider here in general: filler and heavy litters. So filler is going to be what you use to complete the last few percentages of a level to get to the next level, say from 84 to 85. Or at level 85 you can now go to a brand new dungeon if that's how you choose to level that will give considerably more experience than the 83 one. To be honest, looking at the data, it is actually quite suboptimal to enter the level 83 dungeon when you are level 84 and 500k away from 85. That's where you're going to jam the fillers into. Now let's list the filler content. So fillers are going to include Bozja as my #1 recommendation due to raw speed, fates which are radically slower than Bozja by a significant margin. Yes, that's including if you go and get the maidens. Yes, that's including if you try and get the experience boost ones. It is much slower. It's probably about half the speed of Bozja in my experience, but it does give you bisexual gemstones that can be traded for items, but more detail on that in a moment. The third filler is going to be Pixie Beast Tribe quest, giving 330k experience per Beast Tribe quest, and you can do 3 per day, so roughly 1 million experience per day, and it resets each day, which is going to be fantastic to fill the last bits out. You can use 2 on, say, Warrior, you can use the last one on Paladin, you can mix them however you want. Now, in terms of roulettes, I really had a struggle recommending them, and I still have a struggle recommending them. They are going to be fine, but considering how you can get something like Titania from Shadowbringers as your trial and the amount of experience that I got from it was not super great, I actually hesitate to suggest roulettes for particular filler. Not that I'm saying roulettes are bad. Leveling, frontline as well as main story quest line are going to be great, but not for filler. Now the rest of the guide really is going to be focusing on the heavy lifting content. Now that we have like the putty or caulking or whatever to fill in the little cracks between, the content that we're going to be talking about is the heavy lifters and going to make the overwhelming majority of the experience that you get and be your bread and butter tools to level. Now this would not be a true video if I didn't throw some disclaimers immediately before I started talking about these. Is #1, as a DPS, your #1 enemy to leveling is going to be your queue timers. I've had at times 2-minute queue times for DPS on some content that I'll list here, at other times, and yes, I do mean during Endwalker, during peak hours like the past few weeks, I've had 30-minute queues to enter MSQ roulette for Praetorium. Actually, I was put in Castor Mariandum, which made it even worse. Some people can argue that you're going to do fates, but what I have found with fates is without a group, it is very hard to coordinate, it is very hard to get gold consistently. So fates generally in between solo, while you're in a queue, I really do struggle to recommend. Maybe as a duo would be better, but I found that with the scaling of the fates, it was just not realistic. It would be like, depending on the scaling of fates, like if a hunt train, which is what I'm assuming what has the scaling whacked off, some of the fates have literally taken me like well over 5 minutes to like try and solo, and that's if the mobs don't completely overwhelm my chocobo on healer stance, which unfortunately did happen. Now the second big disclaimer is whenever I list a method that is more group dependent, which is going to be dungeons or something like Alliance Rage Roulettes, the effectiveness of these methods can nosedive incredibly hard dependent on the skill level of your group. I can tell you when I go on healer into these dungeons and DPS to the point that I expect my tank to crit their pants, I struggle to get below 15-minute timers on some of these dungeons no matter how hard I try. I'd say in general with dungeons, expect around a 20-minute of in-dungeon time based off of the data I collected. Likewise, my spreadsheet is totally here and totally available to see. Remember, that's with me on healer DPSing as a healer. If you are having something like a scholar or a sage that is like determined to like spam diagnosis or physic and not cast any damage spells because it goes against their particular healer mantra or something like that, I'd start to bump it up to like 25 minutes. Leveling DPS was at times very interesting, I will put it that way. First up is level 80 to 81, which sucks for a lot of people. I'm not gonna beat around the bush, it sucks, because you can't really do Endwalker dungeons because that's at 81. And so really with 80 to 81, you have 4 options here. Bozja, which is going to be the fastest method by far in my opinion, and is my personal recommendation by far. It's what I personally did. I practice what I preach, and I absolutely did this for the majority of them. 80 to 81 took me during Bozja like literally 15-ish minutes when I got it really down packed. You can do MSQ roulette and hope that you land a Praetorium that will give you a full level. To avoid repeating myself later, yes, Praetorium absolutely gives you like 95% or something wild experience at even at level 89. Praetorium is a great way to totally avoid a particular level that you don't want to do. Next up is Frontline Roulette was surprisingly effective tool. Duty Roulette leveling was also alright, but I would in general prefer Bozja over that for sure, since leveling Roulette you really get kind of potentially 25-minute queues, as I disclaimed already. Or I mean, yeah, you're getting the maybe 25-minute queue, but you're also gonna maybe get like a 25-minute, like the Sage that has decided to let go of their more damaging ways just because being a sage, they believe that the core tenet of being a sage is like healing people, and that dealing damage makes them evil, like someone from like a storyline quest or something. Girl, I've heard it all. Jaina is my #1 inspiration. That's why I don't cast fire spells. I play a healer because I believe in peace, serenity, and tranquility. I'm gonna belabor the point, moving on. Another option for 80 to 81 is going to be using Wondrous Tales here, but I'd avoid that and save that for like level 88, because that's the real kicker for dungeons, or level 89, that is the hardest for Bozja. You could also do those with Praetorium, but those are options here. Capstone this section off is 80 to 81 is do not waste your time on things like level 80 dungeons. Not great experience. Sadly experienced them myself. Not great. Level 79 dungeon is also not great. Tested that too. Other roulettes are possible, but honestly weren't great in my experience. My personal preference is to blow through this with the other 3 options, since you can't really test your Endwalker job design at this point, since the Tower of Zot is at least level 81. Now from level 81 to 90 we have some options, and you need to pick what is the best fit for you personally. Trying all of these methods myself, I realized that this isn't really a one-size-fits-all kind of deal, and so I'm going to go over the pros and cons of each of the methods. So first up is my #1 recommendation that made up easily like 70% of more of my leveling experience. In fact, definitely made more than 70%, which is Bozja, and I've detailed the exact methods and techniques that I used in my Bozja videos that will be in the description as well as the pinned comments. If you use these techniques, it will go very, very, very fast for you. This is definitely what made up the lion's share of all of my 90s, and I really think that my character sheet showing all 90s in literally everything for a week now speaks for itself. Like, I practice what I preach. I'm not just like being a talking head being like, oh, I recommend this, but I'm not actually gonna do it. This is what I actually did. So in terms of the pros, as I said before, this is the absolute fastest method to level. The absolute fastest, there's nothing that compete other than dungeons, specifically at level 89 is when it starts competing, or pre-mates at level 87, but we're talking good pre-mates. We're not talking about your buddies taking like half an hour to clear it. We're talking about like a good speed clear pre-mate. And even then, that is assuming no queue and that team's going to be decent. I finished level 89 to 90 in about as short as like 32 minutes, or averaging around 35 to sometimes even 40 minutes in Bozja. It really depends on the spawn rates of the fates, skirmishes. But the biggest perk outside of leveling is that it lets you build up relic weapons, which Shadowbringers relic weapons are phenomenal, and they are pretty much brand new content. No, they are not Endwalker content, but they've only been out for a few months now. They were like at the tail end of this expansion, the Shadowbringers expansion. Like the Red Mage weapon is intensely great. I adore it. Many people do as well. The Gunbreaker is incredible. The Warriors, there is just a lot of cool options here that you can work toward passively while leveling. Another thing about the Bozja method is it also gives you fragments and clusters that you can then sell on the market board. The clusters you exchange for an item like the mount. So clusters, you can buy that math mount that so many people like pulling out to scare others, because math and prime numbers, and is 1 a prime number? Is 1 divisible by 1 in itself? Or is it not? Oh look, you took damage and die now. Yeah, people like buying that mount. People pay decently for that. I think that I sold one of those mounts for like 700k around there on Gilgamesh. Fragments are also great. Now in terms of the cons for Bozja, honestly the biggest con is that you won't be able to learn how to play your job until level 90. Though realistically some jobs like Paladin have a pretty radical rotational shakeup at 90, so you'd be learning in level 90 expert roulette or normal trials anyhow. Or maybe expert learning parties. Yeah, maybe, why not? time. The next con is that if you aren't prepared, like I do warn excessively in my videos, like I have given you breath taker tips, I have given you death tips, I have given you lodestone tips, I have given you the whole gambit, riding maps. Like if you aren't ready, like I warn in the videos, you will be left behind honestly in the dirt and come to my video claiming that it took you 2 hours, over 2 hours to do level 80 to 81 or 5 hours in Bozja from 89 to 90. I don't know how you did that, but rest assured I have read some shizzle and I do read my comments. Sometimes I need a bit of a drink. Now the second thing on my list is fates, and fates is something that you should be doing as a part of leveling, always to double dip. This is something that I'm going to say because you probably will want to unlock the shared fates completely. So shared fates need 66 fates across all of the new Endwalker maps, and so that is a lot of experience that you should definitely take up. You also earn bisexual gemstones that you can use to buy special monster drops because most people are either too lazy or rather just refuse to grind the mobs themselves. I usually use retainers myself for these materials, but I digress. 2 bisexuals can be traded in for a mob item that can be sold on the market board for around 1k gil per on Gilgamesh right now, so roughly 7k gil per fate. Now problems with fates that make it not my #1 recommendation are, I'm just gonna say it, plentiful. I unlocked shared fates to have this cute crown and complete the content and test this myself and ran into many irritations. First up is, yes, fates can sometimes be scaled properly to your level, making them go at a decent rate, but the reality is this might be tied to hunt trains or something. I don't really know exactly how it works, but unless it's quite literally 4 o'clock AM my time when I got some footage that I'm showing on the screen now with my scholar, as I was hunting the bisexual gemstones for the Charlion lampposts for my house. But my point is, at any other time of day I found, and I have tried many different times for this just to make sure that I'm actually saying something that I've actually like stand behind. Any other time of day, really, these fates are morbidly, disgustingly, and horrendously overtuned, like huge HP sponges, and it's not just on this map either. And at a default rate of 220k experience per, it is literally 2/3 of 330k from a Bozja skirmish. And yes, you can get the maiden XP buff. Yes, some fates have bonus experience too, but those are pretty few and far between in my experience. Also, if you are going to a map where you aren't high enough level to be on that map, like 89 for Ultima Thule, but you're in on an 85 character, your experience will get slashed for that level. It might seem like not that big of a deal, but if there aren't any fate parties going, which you will absolutely want one in my experience too, soloing was nightmare fuel for me, you're kind of screwed in this instance. But speaking of instances, what makes it even bigger kick is the instances. These currently do help this method somewhat because you can re-instance for more fates, like if your map is completely like done with fates and like cleaned up. But I mean, it is terribly, and I mean quite terribly difficult to manage that when there are multiple groups in, say, Elpis, or a chi gathering party in Ultima Thule making fate scale through the absolute ceiling. So the combination of lower default experience, lower spawn rate, more difficult multi-tagging, which is like the pinnacle of Bozja, like what you should be doing in Bozja's multi-tagging, and then the absolute ruined scaling makes it honestly take over double the time to level as in Bozja, or rather in some of my tests it was double, but then at other tests that I did fates, it was like 5 times longer over an hour-long set period of time, like a vertical slice or whatever you'd call it. But from fate scaling and other groups picking off fates leading to fate stagnation, it was just horrendously volatile. It was anywhere from double to sometimes 5 times longer in an hour period. It was very volatile. Regardless though, I think everyone should do it just for the shared fate unlocks. Get Gil from the bisexual gemstones. Those remain very strong points in favor of this, but I will almost always pick Bozja now that I have that unlocked, unless I'm exclusively grinding for a bisexual gemstone item. And my third method that I recommend is dungeons, and this will be significantly worse for those who do not have a pre-made party with good healers that actually contribute DPS whenever possible. Even worse if you are a DPS dealing with potentially over 20-minute queues, like what I myself had to have happen a few times actually when I was testing this on DPS myself. But what you do get from dungeons is a very consistent, predictable, steady stream of experience acquisition, and if you have rested experience, it does become really good. But if you don't, then not so much. From my data, it is still notably slower than Bozja up to level 87, where a fast pre-made with no queue time does become equal. Same with level 89, that I could consider kind of on equal footing to Bozja, but prior to 87, I'd never really considered dungeons to level again. Like, if you gave me an alt to level, like, with all the jobs, I would not do it. Pros of dungeons are quite simple. You get to test your class. Desynthesis is fine. It's fine. It's okay. But I would far from call it a good guild making source, since you need to get the item looted and something worth selling on the market board. Many of those materials end up honestly just being cheap junk. Now the cons are, like mentioned before, they are significantly, horrendously slower than Bozja. If you say queue as a DPS for 23 minutes, get into a dungeon and come across a sage that decided that they are now the patron saint of healing, that gave up their filthy, vile, dirty ways of dealing damage to pursue a life of only casting diagnosis as a sage. Aww. That dungeon might take up to 30 minutes to complete. Bless their heart, but that means 53 minutes just to get under half of a level, making a Tower of Zot run at level 81 a very, very hard sell to me that did 81 to 82 in just under 20 minutes via Bozja. Fourth section is kind of a catch-all for heavy experience lifter content. You could technically use this as filler, but I consider these heavy lifters instead. So here's what I'm going to make mentions of. First up is MSQ Roulette, specifically Praetorian, which will give you like 95% of a level of experience, even at level 89. Yes, I tested that, and that was beautiful. Frontline Roulette surprised me and was actually a really great experience for the time. Alliance Roulette was actually pretty fast for me if you got Circus Tower, which was a very common and great boost to experience. I personally, however, would not want to do the final Evilise raid, because that third boss, I learned the hard way, is a big white machine. Even if it gave me like a full level, sometimes it has just been such a bad slog. And then there's a vote abandon, and it's not really something that you can control that much, because it's like 23 other people in a 24 alliance raid. I've had very bad experiences with that one personally. Leveling Roulette, I wasn't super over the moon with, but it was okay. Like, it took a long time to queue in. You'd get Copper Bell mines with sprouts. You want to make sure that you respect the sprouts and that you're not like being like, oh, we need to rush, blah 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 blah. You want to make sure that they have a good experience, or at least I like to. I like to definitely make sure that I'm not like overwhelming the sprouts. Like, it's like I'm not gonna like take a sprout tank and be like, you need to bow, like, no. And plus, you don't even have AoE at that level. Just generally speaking, leveling Roulette just didn't pan out that great. It was fine. There was even a run that I had on my Dragoon where I was doing leveling Roulette in the 89 dungeon, and the whole sum of the leveling Roulette bonus plus the dungeon experience was alright, but it wasn't mind-blowing. The things that I'd avoid for sure would be other roulettes like Trials, 50, 60, 70, and literally anything else actually that I haven't mentioned outright. I struggle very hard to recommend. I'd go so far actually as to say anything not mentioned I do not recommend. I'd avoid. Anyhow, that's the total 80 to 90 leveling guide done by someone who reached peak degeneracy and leveled everything to level 90 in 3 weeks from expansion's early access launch. As always, if you have any thoughts on this, please let me know in the comments. I'm almost always reading and trying to get insight into what I can improve or how I can help more. But yeah, that took a few days, and collaborated with and asked around with a lot of people, and I'm feeling that this video has a lot of potential to help a lot of people, especially people who are looking for more options than just Bozja. Anyhow, take care everyone, and stay safe, and have a happy new year. Here's to 2022 and a great year ahead.